or they'll give you an order on a mission to go do something, and you go do it, and it turns out it was outside the scope of engagement. And they're like, "Listen, did you kill that woman and her kid in there?" Yeah, I was told to. They were going to be they were suicide bombers. No, they weren't. They were just innocent people. And then they had that leverage, and this is what they're doing to a lot of the younger guys.
What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Beyond the Break. Today I have Matt on the channel. All right. He and I have been talking, and I want to say it was uh, about 6 months back. I released a video about John Chapman because at the time there was footage on YouTube going around of, the combat controller and what he was doing. He was left on the mountain because I had a lot of SEAL reach out to me and say he wasn't left, they were separated. And they try to throw Tungo Tungo out there and say, oh, those four Green Berets left the other four Green Berets. I'm like, no, that's separation. Those guys had a break in contact and they were no shit fighting for each other, right? Because when I look at war and why I'm there doing work, it's because of my battle buddies to my left and to my right, right? So I got a lot of blowback about that, but something about that incident didn't sit well with me, and it still doesn't, right? At no point in time should an American soldier, airman, sailor, or Marine be left behind. Now I get it, the odds were overwhelming, but as a Green Beret, like some of the guys that I've grew up with, some of the guys that I was on teams with, like no situation has ever crossed my mind to where I would leave those guys, right? And I've been in the shit. I've been in situation where it was just me and one other guy, and we're removed with, commandos are separated, and it's just me and this dude going at it, right? We had a radio and we're just dropping air. Like I've been in those situations, but at no point in time did I ever thought about, just getting out of there and leaving a buddy behind. So I caught a lot of shit about that video, right? But my stance on it hasn't changed. But I'm glad you're here, Matt, because you've done a lot of research on this particular topic. So before we jump into John Chapman and his story, you've also done a lot of research about the brand that is the SEALs, right? Because within the community, we always joke around about how SEALs are, they write the books, they make the movies, the TV shows, and all of that stuff, right? But you have a theory as to why that is and how that came about. So please, Matt, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks again for having me, man. It's always fun, and I enjoyed talking about this stuff because it's important that we educate people on realities and not live out our fictitious beliefs through movies and books that may only want us to believe a certain thing because that's the way it was crafted to manipulate your thought process. So for me, when I got involved in all this through the investigation into Commander Joe Price's death um, in Afghanistan in 2012, who was a buddy of mine, it opened up a lot of pathways for me. And one of those pathways was the Roberts Ridge incident back in March of 2002. And through my investigation, I was able to get a hold of Chapman's sister, John Chapman's sister, Lori Longfritz, Chapman Longfritz, who co-wrote the book Alone at Dawn, which is an amazing, true account of what happened that day. So if anybody really wants to know what occurred on Roberts Ridge, I'm reporting some stuff that's a little bit um, more behind the scenes as far as intel stuff. But the book itself was brilliantly done about her brother, and I think everybody should read that book because that'll give you an idea of what actually happened versus what the narrative was for about 15 years. So for me, what I consider Roberts Ridge the original sin of the brand, how the brand began, essentially. People will say Marchenko was the beginning of the brand with the books and all that kind of stuff. And he was, it's an 80s guy. But I think the crafting of the brand as a corrupt entity really began with Roberts Ridge. And for people that don't know, basically, SEAL Team 6, Red Squadron was sent out on an early morning mountaintop assertion. It was at the beginning of Operation Anaconda, which was basically a giant force was going to take over this valley, and they were putting in Delta Navy SEALs and other special operations on top of these mountains in order to create overwatch and sort of provide intel as to what was going on down in the valley for the troops going in through there. This mission was planned by a man named Tim Szymanski, who at the time was the operations officer. You're going to hear his name a lot in things that I talk about. It was a plan that was denied. Like, other teams within SEAL Team 6 did not want to take this mission. It was early on in the war. There was some belief that Osama bin Laden might have been up on this mountain ridge in Takragar. So most commanders, most people in charge of things want to have the big mission. They want to have they're the ones that did X. And this was a chance to get bin Laden, according to everybody I talked to in the book and everything else. The insertion was not good. They were supposed to insert lower. They ended up inserting higher. They're going to go in lower and climb up. And they ended up inserting higher. And as they were approaching landing, and I will make a correction to something I'd said on Brent's podcast. I'd gotten more information since then. And I'll say that in a second. But I had said that Neil Roberts, who was the SEAL, and the reason why it's called Roberts Ridge, who fell out of the Chinook as they were landing. They'd taken some fire from an RPG. They never actually landed on the first attempt, but Neil Roberts fell out of the back of the helicopter, out of the back of the Chinook. I had said that he was more than likely dead upon impact based on the height from which he'd fallen. It was somewhere between 10 and 20 feet, I'm told now. Wasn't necessarily real close to the ground, but it wasn't as high up as I was initially told. And that there was actually ISR feed that I've yet to see, but I've been told by several people who have seen it, that shows Neil actually fighting on the ground hand to hand with his attackers. So he was definitely alive. He ended up dying there shortly thereafter, before they ever came back, but they were unaware that he had been that he was alive and fighting, or that he was dead. They were going to come back and save him, was the plan. So they leave without inserting on the mountain. They end up coming back, reinserting, and when they get off the helicopter, they're immediately met by gunfire. And John Chapman, the story goes that Britt Slabinski charges this mountain, goes up the mountain, and this is knee to waist high snow too. This was really, really brutal conditions to be fighting in.
So I think this is interesting too, man, because again, being in the military, having spent 15 years in special operations, like when we do these type of missions, the ground force commander is never, ever the first person off the helicopter. And it's because as a ground force commander, he's pretty fucking important for us to be able to get air support and do work, right? Like we want to, like, the combat controller and the ground force commander, like those guys, we want to safe, like we want to keep them safe because they're our lifeline. You know what I mean? So please continue.
So Britt Slabinski claims that he charged the mountain, that John Chapman followed him, that they engaged bunkers and shot and killed people, and then John was critically wounded, and they were getting too much. The odds were not in their favor. They were getting shot at way from too many things. They weren't going to be able to effectively accomplish missions. So they pulled back and went down the side of the mountain. That's kind of the abridged version of Britt Slabinski's version of what happened. And Britt was the team leader on that mission. In reality, John Chapman, who was the Air Force combat controller, he stormed the mountain. He killed everybody in the first bunker. Britt Slabinski followed him up, was probably 15 to 20 feet behind him at any given time. It wasn't until the first bunker was taken over by by Chapman, did Slabinski actually make his way into the bunker with him. They end up, John had been shot multiple times by this point. They believe one of which was fatal, would have been proven fatal at some point. This story, and this is another thing I found out from a couple sources just recently after I had this conversation, that the belief was that John was rendered unconscious. And they say in that famous video, the ISR video, that It was very emotional to watch the 8.5 minute video that's on YouTube, depicting what happened on that mountain. John never actually was unconscious. That he was actually conscious the entire time, and that when I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get too deep into that because people will start asking too many questions, and I'm not ready to answer those questions just yet because of the newness of the intelligence. But there's reason to believe that he was never rendered unconscious, and that would mean also that when Slabinski said that he checked Chapman before leaving the mountain, and determined that he was dead, that would also destroy that part of the story. Because currently, with him being unconscious, there is some ambiguity on whether or not someone would be able to see if somebody was alive or dead when they're unconscious and bleeding. But the intelligence I have is that John was conscious the entire time. Yes.
So if he was conscious, was he demobilized? Like, was he not able to move? Radio wasn't working? I mean, you don't have to spill the beans, but I'm just curious.
He
Like,
was
was he not able to
intentionally
move?
still. Let's just leave it there. It was a tactic that he was using, from what I've been told. So,
Okay,
yes,
so he was alive still, using, stealth based on where he was located, as far as the enemy goes. And now that I'm thinking about it with this new piece of intelligence, um, he probably didn't realize that he was being left behind because he was too busy taking care of business, doing work. And next thing he knows, he's by his fucking self.
yeah, that's pretty much the scenario. And if he was alive and I mean conscious, we knew he was alive. If he was conscious, then Britt Slavinsky and the other two guys who were up there did not check him. They just abandoned him up there again. And I'm not even. I'll be honest with you. I can in my head understand the chaotic environment they're in, being shot at from three different sides on a 3 foot of snow and a mountain. I get it. I completely can fathom the chaos and things getting missed. Right. So when I question any cover up and when I question any incident prior to the cover up happening, I always say, why would you need to cover up? Why couldn't you just say it went sideways? Like, why couldn't you just say we fucking moved and left, tried to get into a better position? We thought John was dead and he wasn't. Why couldn't you just say that? Why is that such a
Yeah.
horrible admission to have?
Yeah. See, I've been in some chaotic situations, especially in Afghanistan, because I've ran commandos and I've been in some shitty infields. And I've never imagined, like, I've been in a situation, and at no point in time I never, um those thoughts never ran through my mind. And again, I'm not trying to armchair quarterback for the audience that's watching. I'm just saying from my perspective as a Green Beret, and what, like, there's been 8 of us, running these type of missions, like, and we've been in the shit. And again, I've never had those type of thoughts. Now, as far as John Chapman goes, like, what do you think happened to the radios? Because if he was conscious, right, and I would imagine, as the team is peeling off the mountain, there's got to be some type of radio chatter letting everybody know, hey, like, we're bounding back, or hey, we're fucking Ian. Like, how do you explain that?
Well, John, obviously his job was to control the skies, right? So he was going there trying to figure out where the bombs need to be going, right? Where the sky warfare needs to be directed. And that's kind of his job. And from what I was told, John was communicating on the radio. There were other TAC combat controllers on the mountain. One was with Delta Force who heard John calling in things, during that period of time, during that period between when they thought he was unconscious and fighting. There was reports that John was on the radio. He just wasn't responding when the other people called back. He was saying things on the radio that other combat controllers could hear, but he wasn't able to respond back to their response. You know what I'm saying? So maybe there was a break in his radio, not being able to hear anything, but he was able to transmit. So that he was radioing in, from what I was told, Slabinski changed the radio frequency to get the bombs dropped. He switched up the radio frequency and was communicating himself. He called in the airstrikes from the AC-130 gunships, where the 105 howitzer rounds were shellacking that mountainside with John right around it. That I've never been in that situation, but I can only imagine that's got to be pucker factor alpha when
Yeah,
you're
there's a lot of
you're danger close 105 going on.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of because as I'm thinking through it, even if this actually developed the way you're saying it did, then at some point, because you got to think that combat controller, John, he's speaking with the aircraft, right? The aircraft is Air Force, John is Air Force, so they're talking Air Force together. That's how I like to put it whenever we get like a combat controller. We always joke like, hey, you're just here to speak Air Force, right? And he speaks to, the pilot, and that's how they communicate. So now if he's still doing that job and then out of nowhere the um the commander comes on the net and he tries to big dick John and start dropping bombs, then I would imagine there would be some confusion there and there would probably be a conversation had. This is just me thinking through it, if that's what actually took place. Because the
Yeah,
pilot isn't going to take orders from two different people.
the again, I don't know enough about the radio frequencies and who does what on these missions as much as you do. I do know John's responsibility, and I do know what he would have done had this been the perfect scenario where he was able to do his job without being killed. Um, I know that he did not call in airstrikes on himself. I know that that was called in by Britt Slabinski. I know that he was calling in on a radio frequency that was combat controller frequency. And whether he was saying I'm alive or I need help, or I don't know the details of the conversation. I was just told that there was uh, another combat controller on the mountain who was with a Delta unit who heard John's voice on their channel, on their network. After the
Gotcha. And this was after the exfil, correct?
yeah, well, this is when that he's still up on the mountain, supposedly dead, before he comes to or decides to reengage, depending on the intelligence I got, whether he was unconscious and started fighting after a break, or a period of time where he was just laying still conscious and then decided to reengage at the moment he chose to reengage. So John, at some point in time during this period where the team leaves him on the mountain and he's left up there alone, he re-engages the enemy. And this is also at a period of time when the QRF, the Rangers, are coming in to try to rescue them. The beautiful part, and I say it beautiful in an honoring way, that the things that John did is why every little boy decides they want to join the military. That every true man who believes in fighting for something bigger than himself, they dream of being John Chapman in that moment. At least I did. I wasn't physically capable of doing the things that you do with anybody else in the special operations world. But in my brain, as a cop, when I was on SWAT, I was good enough to be SWAT, but I wasn't good enough to be special operations on any level. But on SWAT, I always dreamt about being the guy that goes out in a blaze of glory saving his buddies. Like that was always my dream. And as a little boy, when I joined the military, I always thought that was going to be how I did it. And I'm sure you, when you went into special operations, you'd like, it would be the greatest honor to die for my country and have them tell stories about me 50, 100 years from now, because I was that badass motherfucker. And John is that badass motherfucker. He is that guy that will go down in history now as a guy that should have got 2 Medal of Honors on the same battle. And we'll talk about the whole Medal of Honor debacle, but John was that guy. He was him. And the fact that Britt Slabinski stole that from him for 15 years is a travesty. And he's never apologized for it. He's never acknowledged it. He's relying on the fog of war, and his memory is not clear. And people are just going to look at him now as a victim of war. That he is a victim. He's not a villain now. He's a victim, which is just the churches.
Yeah, I agree 100%, man. Because me just watching that video of John on top of that mountain doing work, like I travel back to when me and my guys were on the mountain doing work, right? Because just imagine if you have 8 John Chapmans up there. You know what I mean? Because that's what it's all about. When you get into special operations and you're the tip of the spear, like we expect everyone to be like John Chapman. And when you put 8 John Chapmans together, we're unstoppable, right? Because that's what makes us special. That's what makes us, 1% of the 1%. That's what it's all about. Now, you mentioned that John Chapman's Valor was stolen for 15 years. How did that develop, and how did they end up remedying the situation as far as finding out who actually did what?
So, yeah, I said in the beginning, this is the original sin. They realized that there were mistakes in that mountain. John was left. John ended up battling by himself alone and dying. And whoever, Tim Szymanski and people above him, decided that that wasn't going to be the story that was told. The story that was told was that John Chapman died heroically, as the Robin to the Batman, not Batman. And they let Brit Slabinski be Batman and gave him the credit that John actually did, and that was just going to be the narrative. And at the time, the technology was that the ISR feed from the drone, the CIA drone, which basically just shows a bunch of ants running around in a video. You don't really know who's who, who's doing what. There's no way to identify anybody. And it wasn't until the SIGINT component to this, the ability to capture the radio frequencies of each person and then tag them in the ISR feed and marry the two technologies together, that they were able to determine who did what. And that was 15 years later. And I don't think it's because the technology wasn't available earlier or the information wasn't available earlier. It's just that no one put the effort in to marry the two technologies. It wasn't, that took 15 years for that to become known. And then during that period of time was also when that information was coming out that this is what this was going to show, everybody was in a rush to get everybody their medals and their promotions. I said, Navy SEALs love to promote and medal award people that fuck up. So John Chapman, the Secretary of the Air Force, decided to do like an internal, let's look and see if John Chapman is going to a guy that's potentially a Medal of Honor recipient. Let's look and see if there's anybody else in the Air Force in the history of our branch that has ever done anything that might be also Medal of Honor worthy. And it turns out there wasn't. John was the only one that met the standards for a Medal of Honor. So they put a package in, and at the same time, the Navy put a package in for Brit Slabinski for his Medal of Honor. Initially, Brit Slabinski's was denied by the Department of Defense. They said no to Brit's. John Chapman's was up for review, and the U.S. Navy and SEAL Team 6 specifically, and Tim Szymanski specifically, did everything they could to block John Chapman's Medal of Honor. There were meetings at the Department of Defense, at the Pentagon, between the Air Force and the Navy, and trying to figure out who did what. And one of the things that is very telling is that when John, right after the mission, John was put on the Navy SEAL Wall of Fame, essentially. He's the only non-SEAL to get that honor. So they clearly at the time needed to say John was a stud. But by the way, Brit Slabinski did all the major stuff. But they gave John a little bit of love by putting him on their Wall of Fame. And the 3 SEALs that were up on the mountain, 3 of the SEALs up on the mountain there, they wrote statements for John's Air Force Cross. And those statements weren't signed, they were sent by email. But the standard for the statements didn't require signatures for the Air Force. So 15 years later, when it's time for John to get his Medal of Honor, those 3 same SEALs were contacted to sign this, to give the same statements, but sign them. And they refused to do so. because once you sign them, then you're validating the Medal of Honor's requirement to have a signed statement and that you're standing by what you say happened. That's number one. Number two, they created a propaganda video called Redbeard, where they played it for the Pentagon officials at the Medal of Honor inquiry meeting, basically saying that it was two Al Qaeda fighters fighting each other, not John waking up and fighting to his death, which is fucked up that they would do that. And I mean, it was a full court press to stop his Medal of Honor. And then when they were going to capitulate and allow it to happen, they only wanted the first half of John's heroism prior to him being unconscious or laying there conscious and not moving. They only wanted the first half because they didn't want to have the we left him on the mountain part. And then he went, for whatever reason, woke up or decided to re-engage and kill a bunch of other people until he died. They wanted that part out of the MOH, which is fucked up. So ultimately, everything was put in, and that was it was supposed to be done during Obama's administration, but the delay with all the pushback from the Navy caused it to be held over until Trump's administration. And when it changes administrations, they got to go through all the loop again. They can't just pick up where it was left off. They had to go resubmit, do all the process again, and the Navy once again tried to block it even more, until it was finally they relented. And it wasn't, but it had to have Britt get his first. Slabinski got his first, and then John got his posthumously. It's just a travesty. The entire thing is just a complete.
What did Sabinsky get the Medal of Honor for?
For being with John charging that mountain, essentially showing heroism, bravery. If you read the citation, it's pretty much the same as John's. There isn't a whole lot different between what Britt's Medal of Honor citation says and John's, and that's kind of the Navy's way of sticking it to John, not admitting their fault, but admitting that John did enough to get a Medal of Honor. He didn't just go as the plus one to the wedding, right? He actually was the invited person. He should have been alone in that Medal of Honor. Slabinski did not deserve it.
I tell you what, that's a good way of taking attention away from the fact that you lost two guys on an operation that was poorly planned. It's by saying two Medal of Honor.
And let's not forget, they lost, he saved 18 of the 23 of the QRF with his actions. There were a lot of people's lives that were saved by John, because the QRF component, that was all John. The SEALs were on the side of the mountain. They weren't engaging in fighting. John was the only one that was redirecting fire himself so that guys could get off that helicopter and start doing work. And, the brand began then. That was the beginning of the brand, when they realized that they had a formula that would allow them, because with anything, whether it's cheating on your wife or, getting in an argument or leaving a man on the mountain to die, time is your greatest ally. If you can take time and create time in between the offense and the truth, or the apology or whatever, that is the greatest thing you can have. And it's, they got a 15-year buffer between the incident and the truth. And over time, the anger diminishes, the insult diminishes. And they were lucky, and they realized that if they can just lie long enough, if the truth ever comes out, it won't hurt as bad. And in the meantime, we're going to take advantage of the opportunity that's presented to us by putting out fictitious false statements that make us look good and get us to have cover while we're doing other stuff over here. It's like, look at the shiny thing over here while we're trying to clean up the mess over here. It's the great distraction. And that's what the brand is. The brand has been created to create the distraction, to allow the cover-ups to happen, to allow the criminal activity to happen, to allow murders to happen, and for them to be not paid attention to so that they can deal with it and put a rug over it. That's all the brand is. The brand is just the money-making PR version for that.
And I want to make sure people understands like we're not saying that all SEALs are like this, right? There's some good dudes, I'm sure, within the SEAL teams that also want to do the right thing. But based on what I'm hearing, those dudes are they either find ways to keep them silent or to control them, right? Um,
Well, they'll do
and
stuff like this. I'll give you an example. They'll say
okay,
to a, to a SEAL, they'll go, hey, you can do some minor little thing that is policy wise you shouldn't be doing. They'll say, no, no, no. And your boss say, go ahead, do it. Next day they'll be like, hey, did you do that? He's like, yeah, you said I could. He goes, no, I didn't. I'm gonna have to write you up for that. And they death by a thousand cut. They get these guys so many infractions against them that then they go, okay, here's the deal, dude. We're gonna have to remove you from the team, unless, of course, or they get a DUI. Like, listen, we're gonna have to kick you out, and then a higher up command person will go, listen, I think there's a way around this. I'll take care of it. We'll make that go away, and now you're owned. Or they'll give you an order on a mission to go do something, and you go do it, and it turns out it was outside of the scope of engagement. And they're like, listen, did you kill that woman and her kid in there? Yeah, I was told to. They were going to be they're suicide bombers. No, they weren't. They were just innocent people. And then they have that leverage. And this is what they're doing to a lot of the younger guys that are coming in, because they're recruiting guys that have, some moral issues and some behavioral issues and some integrity issues. And because these are probably stud athletes who didn't like school and didn't like authority and didn't like being told what to do. And oh, you're going to give me a gun and teach me how to be the baddest motherfucker on the planet? Okay, I'm in. And then next thing you know, go do that. Yes, sir. I love doing that kind of shit. Next thing you know, that's being held over you. And then they're saying, okay, go take this package to there, and you find out it's drugs or it's ASOP money. And next thing you know, you're involved in this network of corruption and lies, and you have no way out of it. And when the opportunity exists, like we have right now, where people can come forward and say something, there's that fear component. People don't want to lose what they value the most. And a lot of the guys in the teams, and I'm sure it is the same way with SEALs and the Delta and Special Forces, that you guys love your unit. You love being part of their Special Forces group. You love the team that you're with. You love the honor and respect that you get for being a special operations guy. And that's your identity. And that's who you are. And if somebody's going to take that from you, that is a major motivator to shut the fuck up. Now, luckily, the wheels are starting to come off the tracks. And, we're going to talk about Rob O'Neill a little bit later and Melgar. And there's a window of opportunity for guys who have something they've had on their chest for a while to get it off, to go public and to share what's going on, to right the wrongs, to bring back the honor and dignity of the SEAL program. And it's that time now, and that's my goal. If I can get people talking, if I'm going to come out here as somebody who's not even in, the only force I got in this race is Joe. I'm not a SEAL. I've never witnessed any of this stuff. I've just been asked to look at one case. Next thing you know, I have all this information. So for me, I want people to look in the mirror and go, am I willing to go to my grave knowing that I participated in a corrupt organization that got people killed and that got future people killed who decided they wanted to join the ranks? And you talked about that. You're on a mission to save the next generation from coming into a fucked up military that's broken, that's putting them at risk. It's not what they're being sold when they're getting recruited. And you want it to be exactly what it is they're being told. If you believe we're the good guy, that we always do the right thing, that's what it should be.
yeah, I agree 100% because, especially over here on my channel, like I preach that, hey, coach, teach, mentor, and make the next generation better, right? Like I have skin in the game. I have a son that might one day want to be a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret or whatever. You know what I mean? I would be failing him if all of this shit wasn't talked about and fixed because at the end of the day, citizens are letting their kids join the military. And to hear that this is the shit that they're going into is ridiculous, right? Because we have a recruiting crisis right now, and I blame it on leadership, right? Shitty leadership. That's where it all starts. And if we don't fix it, it's only going to get worse. And the fact that, again, like while I was, running and gunning and serving, like I didn't think twice about, what the SEALs had going on. I had my own shit going on, right? And folks all often ask, well, like, why do you guys always talk shit about the SEALs? Because they give us the most to talk shit about. That's what it comes down to, right? So, um, it's just crazy that all this stuff is happening because they want that brand. They want to be, in the public's eyes as being the best. And they've achieved that, right? Like everywhere you
Oh, yeah.
look. Like I've been in boardrooms where we're briefing like CEOs of big companies and they didn't even know who Green Berets were. They're like, Green Berets, who are you guys? Like, we like Navy SEALs. And we're like, oh, okay, we're in the Army and this is what we do. You know what I mean? So whatever they're doing is working, but at what expense? Like what is it causing? So,
And that's, the
yeah,
brand,
interesting conversation, to say the least.
if you look over my shoulder, the book Code of a Country, that book did more to shed light on specifically SEAL Team 6, the crimes that have occurred on SEAL Team 6 over the years than anything that has ever been published before. So I highly recommend everybody get Alone at Dawn, the true story about John Chapman, and Code of a Country from Matt Cole, if you want to learn more about SEAL Team 6 stuff. But yeah, the brand, and that's really deep into the brand, that book as well. But yeah, it's time to bring the brand um, to its knees and stop the bleeding for our country, so that the next generation of warfighters aren't going to be sucked into this corrupt network of lies and deceit and corruption.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree 100%. Well, I appreciate you coming on, Matt, and speaking about John Chapman and what he did on that mountain and the cover up behind it. If folks want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
I have an old website that's still up. Back when I was doing leadership development and mentoring kids and public speaking and stuff. It's mattcubbler.com, mattcubler.com, or you can email me at matt@mattcubbler.com.